Hi. Hey, it's Deanna Moffitt here. And once again, it is Sunday night, 6 p.m. Pacific time, right here in Los Angeles. We had another beautiful day, and it is time for Moffitt Talks Live. I had a great weekend, went down to San Clemente yesterday, went on a walk with a friend, had some great catching up. In fact, I realized earlier in this week that I was in need of some real life social connections. Uh, I had I've had several, not several, I've had a few people who are near and dear to me move recently, and I was spiraling out a little bit. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today about how we can get caught up in the headlines of our life. And oftentimes, I recognize for me, one thing that was happening earlier today, and it's been happening more recently than I'd like to admit. I, uh, I'll go on and off Twitter. Twitter isn't something that I use regularly, but for whatever reason, I will get on it. And I think it is a coping device, honestly. I think much like, you know, kind of mindless scrolling or doom scrolling, you're really your mind is looking for something to distract you from the thoughts. And I realized I was looking at a headline and, I was reading, and so the headline was something like Britney Spears gets engaged to her boyfriend. The reality is I could care less. I have I have no, Britney Spears doesn't affect my life. I recognized deep into the article that I was having some kind of emotional attachment to this, and I had to just question myself and ask myself, "What am I doing?" I don't care about Britney. Britney doesn't affect my life whatsoever. And I was in this article getting worked up and upset or, happy for her for whatever reason. And she doesn't mean anything to me. And I realized over the last couple of weeks, I have caught myself doing that more and more, getting myself excited or worked up around topics or news stories that have no effect on my life. I mean, on the grand scale, uh, or even close up, I not that they don't have any effect on my life, I don't have any influence over them. So they are outside of my circle of influence. They might be in a circle of concern, but I'm not even that concerned about it. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about the idea of how we get caught up in our own clickbait headlines through our life. One thing that I'll do often is I'll get on Apple News and I'll scroll. And I've stopped the subscription, but I still see the headlines. And lots of times in Apple News, you can still look at content if it's not part of the subscription, just like any news service, right? They'll give you all kinds of headlines. And I'll be searching all the headlines to see which ones am I interested in looking at. And, I'll dive into an article with, in reality, I'm not that interested in. It is a diversion from the work and the things that I really want to do. And let's be real, how often do we do that in our real lives? Not with news headlines, but with thoughts that are going on in our head. That a thought will come across, we'll click on it, and all of a sudden we're going down a rabbit hole around the thoughts that we're having. There's some research that says that we have over 60,000 thoughts a day. That's quite a few thoughts. And over 90% of those are thoughts we have repeatedly had. And so when we think about how do we break free from the headlines that we are creating, and we go back to read these headlines over and over and over again, instead of stopping, getting away from our thoughts, and moving into a healthier and maybe even creating a brand new headline that actually serves us, which is much more positive. So I thought I should just share with you some tactics that you can use if you find yourself kind of doom scrolling your own thoughts, creating clickbait headlines that you're going diving deep down into. And one of the things you can start doing when I start scrolling or when I start catching myself is really just awareness. Tara Brach talks about the RAIN philosophy, RAIN. The first one is to recognize that we're doing it. And I think that that's so true. I could spend minutes upon minutes, if not an hour, just scrolling without really stopping myself to question, wait a minute, what am I doing? And the same thing can happen with our thoughts. And oftentimes we don't even recognize this repetitive nature of our thoughts until they start affecting us in ways like emotional, we're emotional, having emotional outbursts, or we feel the discomfort in our bodies somewhere. And all of a sudden we can kind of come up to the present moment and say, wait, what the heck is happening? What is the thought that's on repeat that's going on in my head? Now, if we can catch the thought and if we can recognize what it is, and usually those thoughts are things like, you know, oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that thing. Or who do I think I am to try and create this new thing? Or I'm never going to be able to be as successful. Like all these things. Now, if we can catch those thoughts, and remember, our thoughts are 90% on repeat. Here's what I would love for us all to try, and that is, why don't we start creating some better thoughts that we can then consciously put on repeat so that hopefully they can get into the unconscious stream that's behind us? But that takes some effort. And one of the things we need to think about is, what is the conscious thought that I want to have that could eventually go into the subconscious stream? And, our core beliefs are, as Dr. Nicole LePera talks about in her book, Do the Work. She says that our core beliefs are just our thoughts that have we've just let run rampant, that we've just got no checks and controls on them. There's no checks and balances on our thought process. And part of the work really is, let's insert the thoughts or the headlines that we want in our life that would give us a better, more positive effect. And so, if you were to think about, oh my gosh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I'm doing this. Who do I think I am trying to create this thing? Right? If we can catch that, and then we can start thinking about or creating, what is the thought process we want to have. So it might be something like, I am scared to do this. I don't know how to do it. And yet I'm going to persevere, right? It doesn't deny that you're fear or you're scared, but it just gives us a better, more powerful thought to put in its place. So, or maybe oh God, I'm such an idiot. Oh, I made a mistake. That isn't the way I wanted to work in, and I'm going to learn something from that, right? So, if we can catch the 90% of thoughts that are on usually that negative repetitive cycle and start to consciously catch it and work to create a better thought process. And yep, it does take work. And here's why this is so hard, because our brains, they love to be lazy. Our brains are super capable, but because that is, conscious thought is our most glucose dependent activity. Hi, Marty, how are you? So glad to have you here. Because our brains are such glucose dependent, or conscious thought is such glucose dependent activity, it takes a lot of effort to be conscious, that our brains, as super powerful as they are also super lazy and would just rather go into this repetitive cycle again. It's just easier and it can sit back and relax. So it's going to require us to do some work, but this is the fun part. We can create a thought cycle that actually will serve us much better and get us out of this negative clickbait headline scenario that we're in. Another way to do this is also to think about a mantra. A mantra can come in. This is also very helpful if we can catch the thought, because sometimes these thoughts are unknowingly putting us into a fight or flight state. It raises our cortisol, so every thought has an emotion attached to it, and we don't recognize these things because they're happening so often, and they're just slowly shifting underneath the sands of who we are. But this is one of the things that leads us to overwhelming burnout, is not only, what we're having to go through, but also our interpretation of the experience. So one of the mantras that I often encourage my clients to come up with is, I am safe. I am okay. Everything will work out as it needs to. right? Whatever the mantra is true for you, I'm okay. And again, this has a calming effect on our vagus nerve, that idea of coming back, even using the word "voo" to stimulate that vagus nerve that's in the back of our throat, to bring back our regulation so we can come back into a more thoughtful process as opposed to the emotional reaction that we can have to our clickbait headlines. Another tactic that I love to use, not only for myself, but for my clients, is when we can catch our repetitive thoughts, go write them down. And go write them down as the observer of your thoughts. Because what I love doing this, because when I start writing down my shitty little thoughts that I'll have, I can immediately look at them and start to argue the opposite, right? But in my head, they're just giant kind of monster gremlins that seem difficult to challenge or fight. But when I can put them down on paper and all of a sudden I look at them, I can say, oh, that's not true. This is so not true. And I can come up with reasons why it's not true, which can then help break that negative headline that's going on in our heads. These are all different tactics. What I found working with all of my clients is there's no one set way that's going to help everybody. Everybody's got to find their own tactics. For some of my clients, they hate journaling. For some of them, if I were to give them meditation, it's too challenging for them in the moment. But one of the things I would encourage you to think about is testing out different methodologies of catching the repetitive thought. Remember, 90% of our thoughts are repetitive. How do we catch it? How do we mitigate it? And how do we create a new, different headline that will give us the feeling of puppies, that will give us the feeling of musicals, that will give us the feeling of lightness and airy, as opposed to the doom scrolling that can happen in our brain when we really attach ourselves to the headlines that are happening? So that is Moffitt Talks tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm here every Sunday at 6 p.m. with something new for you every week. And this feeds into my blog. If you want to go to deannamoffitt.com, you can always check out my blog or join me on my newsletter. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Bye.